Bolt with the Bolt Report.
You know, next year I'm going to be having a housewarming. My new home, it's being built. But this housewarming will be in the form of a party to mark the opening of the last library I reckon could be built in Australia. And that's because my home is going to be designed as a library with bedrooms. And that's always been my dream. And I think it will be the last library to be built in Australia because, to be frank, it feels like a great ignorance is sweeping over us, a new sort of dark ages. We've never had people with so much information at their fingertips, yet so little knowledge. And I mean a deep cultural knowledge, particularly a sense of history, including the history of thought. And I guess that's why socialism is suddenly so popular again in the West. I mean, people simply don't remember the history and its horrors. And few people even read the great books either, the great conversation of the West. In fact, two of our universities, Sydney's and the ANU, have even banned the Ramsay Foundation from funding one tiny course in Western civilization, basically a great books course. Too offensive, say the staff. So, someone in my frame of mind would, of course, take notice when an American intellectual, an English professor at Emory University, writes an article, The Overthrow of Great Books, and writes a book called The Dumbest Generation, How the Digital Age Stupefies Young Americans and Jeopardizes Our Future, or Don't Trust Anyone Under 30. And in fact, I'd pay even more attention when the same intellectual was one of the very, very few who endorsed President Donald Trump before he became president. So when this guy, Mark Bauerlein, comes to Australia, I had to have him come in for a chat. Mark, thank you so much indeed for your time.
I'm glad to join you.
Am I too pessimistic?
It's hard not to be pessimistic when you mention the ignorance factor, when in the United States more than 50% of U.S. high school students fail the U.S. history test, and it happens year after year after year. So when you bring up socialism, when you bring up the Cold War, they don't know what you're talking about.
Which explains, I guess, why we've now got socialists sitting in Parliament and one running for the Democrat candidacy to be President of the United States.
Well, we have to remember that the dream, it's so pure, it's so benign. A world without discrimination, a worker's paradise. Isn't that what you want?
Yeah, I don't trust the bozos selling it to me because it always ends up with them having the power and no one else.
Well, for some reason, all these utopian revolutionary figures end up in bloodbaths.
Mere coincidence. If we just give it one more try,
we'll get it right.
It's this pessimism of yours.
Right.
But do you sometimes feel in your darker moments that we are sort of coming to a new dark ages, which seems incredible because we have never had so much access to information?
Right, right. We have the internet brings all the universe of human knowledge to people's fingertips, and yet for most people that's not what the internet is about. It's about social media. It's about taking a picture of the lunch that you're about to eat in a few minutes. Well, porn, yeah, the top websites are heavy porn websites, and so this is what access, immediate access, immediate gratification, hyperstimulation, the idea of sitting down, reading a book for an hour and a half without any interruption, without the ding of the phone, without the text message, without the email. That simply is not part of the habit of the ordinary citizen anymore, especially the millennials.
But see, you might say, you know, this is hyper-democracy at work. This is what you get. You can never expect too much from the lower classes, however you want to imagine that. But this rot seems to start from the top. I mean, you've got, I just mentioned the hostility of some of our top universities, for instance, to even the notion of Western civilization, which I would have thought was one of the greatest man-made creations ever.
Of course. Well, we now have an intellectual elite that are a bunch of phony egalitarians. Because they are people who want to live and let people choose whatever they want to do. They don't want to judge. They don't want to claim greatness over these great books over this. They don't want to say Beethoven is better than rap and hip-hop. They don't want to highlight Western civilization as a glorious record of liberty and freedom and beauty and sublimity. No, they want to take the negative and bring it down. And how do you bring it down?
Why is that?
Well, I think...
Is it because it's easier, because you can be a moron and teach that way?
Well, I think that this attitude of resentment has taken over. A victimology mindset is now spreading everywhere. And so what do we look at when we see Western civilization? We see slavery, we see imperialism, we see patriarchy, we see white supremacy, as if this is Western civilization. And I want to say, no. Western civilization is Mozart, it is Shakespeare, it is Dante, it is the great Gothic cathedrals. This is Western, and of course the great ideas coming out of Athens and coming out of the Old Testament and New Testament of the dignity of the individual, the idea that we are all equal in the eyes of God. This is what Western civilization has given us.
And well, that's the whole thing. That's this idea of so many in the left who are pushing this anti-Western civilization thing, is that, you know, there has to be a perfect society, and they cannot. So if Western civilization's had a flaw, then the whole thing must be junked, without realising that Western civilization has actually included a lot of the thinking and the thinkers that brought an end to, well, you mentioned slavery, an end to slavery. They came from the West.
Of course, and this is one thing that characterizes the West, is that it is interested in other things. It is interested in the outsider, interested in incorporating things from other cultures, other civilizations, and taking it and forming it into what can be the elevation of these noble ideas of precisely liberty, of private property, of individual rights, of everyone is equal. You know, the law, the scales of justice are held by a woman who wears a blindfold. So we judge the high and the low equally on the same standard. This is what the West has done.
Now, does any of this help explain why, when Donald Trump came along, most of your colleagues, you must have been alone, you must have eaten lunch alone at the canteen at Emory University, but most of your colleagues obviously horrified, most of the media horrified by Donald Trump. You said, I endorse him. Why's that?
Well, when Donald Trump said, after winning one of the primaries in South Carolina, in the Republican primaries, I am so sick and tired of this politically correct crap, I thought, this is finally a politician who is expressing the exhaustion, right, that we are having with identity politics, with political correctness. It is no fun to live under this regime where you're feeling policed all the time, where you're under surveillance for your private conversations, for your private thoughts even. I mean, this is getting into thought crimes that we see taking place on the left. And what did Donald Trump do? He broke every rule in the book.
Yeah, but has he had that cultural effect, though, that you would have been hoping for? Because in some ways you might say that policing of thought crimes has got worse. I mean, we're seeing, you know, violent demonstrations against people like Milo Yiannopoulos and things like that. I mean, you're seeing people being deplatformed. You're seeing the Me Too movement calling out even innocent people. I mean,
they're trying to get rid of laughter. They are trying to rid us of beauty. They are producing a world in which everything has to be submitted to a bar of judgment run by a bunch of Robespierres who believe themselves pure in heart, and we've got to make it stop. And the brilliance of someone like Milo was that Milo understood, he said this, what is the sound that a dictatorship of virtue or dictatorship of any kind hates the most? Laughter.
Laughter. Someone should name the comedians that thrived under Adolf Hitler. Very short list. Here's the other weird thing, though. You know, 30 years ago, if you'd really made me choose, and I was always wary, you know, experience has taught me rather than, you know, a determined view of left or right when I was young. If you'd made me choose, I would have said I was of the left. In fact, I worked for our Labor Party on a couple of occasions. But without changing my views much, I actually find that I'm now a conservative and classed by my critics as right-wing. I'll give you one example of a belief that I held that I thought was left-wing and is now seen as an absolute marker of Satan, the 666 on your forehead. One that you mentioned, that we should judge people as individuals and not by class, by race or gender.
Right.
What happened?
Well, if you compare what liberals believed 30 years ago, I mean American liberals here, so these are moderate leftists. What moderate leftists believed 30 years ago in America, believes what they believe now, Back then, it was you judge someone as an individual. Now, we judge someone as the representative of a group. This is what matters. Now, we thought this before. This is stereotyping. This is to dehumanize someone. Well, now, no, we've got a ranking here of group identities. We know who's at the bottom, those white males, white Christian males, in straight white Christian males. It keeps getting more complicated. and the old. And that now there is a ranking of value on group identities. What happened to equality? What happened to Martin Luther King's vision?
Well, that's another one. Honestly,
over.
To say Martin Luther King is now a mark of, you're a suspect if you mention a guy that was hailed as a god. Here's another one.
Who am I, a white guy? What am I invoking Martin Luther King for? I don't have the grounds to do that, right?
Listen, here's another one. Free speech. That used to be a cause of the left. Now, the authors of the attacks on free speech are of the left.
That's right. They keep defining so much free speech as hate speech, and what counts as hate speech keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Hate speech is what they hate. Okay, that's all. That's the definition. I hate your speech, therefore it's hate speech. Finally, if you've got people like I was as a kid, right, in the desert, thinking, how am I going to get out of here kind of thing, and there's a conversation right above my head that's gone on for 2,000 or 3,000 years of the great thinkers and the books, how would I get access to that? Name 3 books that kids like I was should read.
Well, I mean, there's some obvious choices. Today, you could read 1984 is still a crucial book to read, and all the concepts that Orwell talked about are being lived out very much now, including face crime. If you want to talk about the Covington Boys incident, that's a perfect illustration of it. So 1984, The Brothers Karamazov is one of my favorites. And you know what? I'm going to admit, I have never read War and Peace. I am halfway through War and Peace now. I love Prince Andre.
That's two Russians. Two Russians. All right, I'll go for The Leopard, okay? The Leopard by De Lampedusa. So anyway, I'll put more suggestions up on my blog. Mark Bauerlein, it's been an enormous pleasure. How the time has flown. I hope to speak to you sometime again. Well, you're with the IPA and you're giving speeches in...
Brisbane tomorrow, and the next day in Sydney in the public library.
Okay, so go to the IPA website. I'm sure you'll get the details there. Mark Bauerlein, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
After the break, the panel.